Dear friends, grace to you and peace from God our Creator, and from our risen Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, and the power of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Around 2014, my one and only intern that I supervised, Kirsten Moore, many of you remember Kirsten, who was the youth leader here for many years at LCI, we read a book together on stewardship. It was a project to learn more about the theology of stewardship in our seminary program. Kirsten is now a pastor of her own church in Sacramento. The book was called The Soul of Money, written by someone named Lynn Twist. And she's a fundraiser who kind of was sharing her philosophy of money and stewardship, why people give money, why they don't, etc. She told a story about visiting India to talk to a group about this topic. And when she arrived, she was stunned at how many homeless and destitute, impoverished people there were, literally lining the streets. The person that picked her up from the airport literally had to step over these homeless people and taking to her where she needed to go, kind of like stepping over a curb or debris in the street. And the callousness with which this person did that, or indifference, was just stunning to Twist. She couldn't imagine that people could be so impoverished and had to live in this setting. This story illustrates really the callous nature in which our society as a whole treats poverty, or better yet, how we treat those who are impoverished. As Bob Partlow of Woodlands Fourth and Hope said in this very church just a few months ago, this is an outreach ministry in Delaware County that helps hungry, homeless, etc. There is a kind of bigotry towards the poor that we have in our society, as though these people were pariahs or sick or there's something wrong with them, when in fact, really, all of these feelings and these epithets we have towards those who are less fortunate than us are the ways of saying, the poor make me uncomfortable. And perhaps that's as it should be. Poverty exists to remind us of God's grace, that all we have actually belongs to God, not to us, and doesn't call to action. But poverty really is only an abstraction. In a sense, there is no such thing as poverty in the real world. There are impoverished people, human beings who don't have enough money at the end of the month, or who worry about how they'll feed their families or put their children through college or pay the rent. Lazarus, the character from our gospel this morning, is an actual human being with a name. I think that's interesting. The rich man doesn't have a name. Lazarus has a name. And he's simply wretched to the rich man who just cannot see him, or chooses not to see him, or will not see him. I don't know. Yet those in need show us in a real way the very face of God. I think that's a key takeaway from our gospel today. In a world that is horribly callous to the needy, God is out there with those people in need, and not in here with us in our fortresses of self-deception. The story of the unnamed rich man and Lazarus is about gates, walls, and chasms. The story is made possible because there is a gate in which Lazarus lays, which is an entryway and represents the possibility of a relationship between Lazarus, this destitute poor man, and the rich man. He longs for just a few scraps of leftovers from the rich man's sumptuous meals, but alas, Lazarus is invisible to him. The gate symbolizes the possibility of a connection between the rich man and Lazarus, and it presupposes a relationship which the rich man totally misses. Because there was a gate, there was also a wall. Gates exist where there are barriers. Why would one build a wall around one's house? Now, I'm not talking about walls that are part of the structure of the house, the shelter of the house. But think about it. If someone builds a wall around their house, they're anxious about something. They're losing something, they're protecting something. They're maybe not wanting to see what's out there. Of course, walls have existed throughout human history, and they almost always express something negative. Anxiety about what we are afraid of losing, the need to secure things that we want to cling to, or to keep people in or out based on ideology. The Berlin Wall, for example, was constructed by the communists in East Germany as a way of supposedly keeping the Western capitalists out, when in fact it actually kept communists in. In the history of Berlin, of East and West Berlin, they actually built a wall around West Berlin and kind of created almost like a little prison within this communist country of East Germany that was an island of capitalism. It really ended up being people actually wanted to escape from East Berlin into West Berlin so they could get out of communism. If you haven't seen the 2001 film, the Tunnel, I highly recommend it. It documents a tunnel that was dug between East Berlin and West Berlin and the escape attempts for people to get out of that country. So we have gates, we have walls, and we have chasms. A chasm is a deep fissure in the earth, separating one landmass from another, when there's a crack in rock or land. In the case of this story, the chasm is the gulf of separation between the rich man and Lazarus and the afterlife, something that could not be bridged. Clearly, this is a cautionary tale. Although the rich man is shocked at what's happening to him in Hades, that place beneath the earth that he went in the ancient world when he died, he had no idea that he'd done anything wrong, which makes the story a little extra scary. What is it that I, perhaps, haven't done in my life that I should have? His primary sin is blindness, that he just doesn't see Lazarus in his need, even though he's lying at his front gate. And you have to wonder, does he really not see him, or does he choose to look the other way? Lazarus stands for every poor person that we've passed on the street, every cardboard sign we've ignored at the freeway exit, every plea for help we've let slip past us. And we are all implicated in this system of sin and evil, even if some are more responsible than others, and if some suffer extra because of it. The obvious lesson is to take away is to be aware of others and to share what we have with those in need. And to be ready to give out of your abundance. We in the developed, industrialized world would do well to heed this. However, Jesus, as recorded by Luke, seems to say something even stranger. He implies that there is sinfulness simply in being rich. This is a theme in Luke's gospel, and that there's a special blessing in being poor, which is why Jesus says in his Sermon on the Plain, "Blessed are you poor." In Matthew's gospel, he says, "Blessed are the poor in spirit." Not in Luke's gospel. It's, "Blessed are you poor, for you will be filled. And woe to you who are rich, for what you have will be taken away from you." We see that illustrated perfectly in this text. So physically, we have gates, walls, and chasms. Spiritually, we have them as well. If we can think theologically, the chasm we face in our spiritual lives is the gulf of separation from God and from one another that we live with on a daily basis. This is not only a spiritual sickness, it is something that causes pain and distress in our daily lives. In college, when I was facing a particularly difficult crisis, I talked to my roommate about it. I remember it was from my freshman year of college. And I remember him saying to me, "Dan, you're facing the reality that you're all alone in the universe, and in the end, there's nobody really there for you." And I remember thinking, not the words of reassurance that I was quite looking for. But I went to my pastor, the great Reverend John Huber. He was just a wonderful guy, the campus pastor at UC San Diego, where I went for my undergrad. He was actually a Missouri Synod pastor that served also ELCA students. And I told him about my crisis, kind of an identity crisis I was going through. And I told him what my roommate said, that, "Dan, you're all alone in the universe and there's no one really there for you." And he said, "There's a sense in which that's true." It's like, great, thank you. Really not what I was looking for. Pastor Huber actually really helped me through this, was willing to walk alongside me and walk me through this difficult time in my life. And sometimes that thing we don't want to hear but need to hear is exactly what needs to be said. All of these social, emotional pains that we feel in our lives, whatever they may be, underline that great chasm of separation between us, each other, between us and the earth, which I think is important, and the creator of all that is. In the church, we call it sin, the great spiritual chasm. Walls are those things we create to separate and divide us from each other. You know the joke about the woman who goes to heaven and is given the tour by St. Peter? She sees the heavenly library and the glorious cafeteria. They're going through the heavenly Central Park. There's a giant wall in the park, and she's like, "What's that wall?" And St. Peter said, "Oh, we built that for the Lutherans. They think they're the only ones up here." You haven't heard that one before, somebody maybe. Walls are so often structures that certain people create to make themselves feel superior to others. Something we have to think about. But of course, they aren't just physical structures. They exist in our minds, in our hearts, in our psyches. In many ways, the physical walls represent the internal walls that we build to protect ourselves or to keep others out. And they distract us from our deeper problem of alienation and loneliness. But they are like a scar that cuts through the landscapes of our lives. There have been so many walls in human history. The Berlin Wall is one example I mentioned a little while ago. Meant both to keep people out and keep people in. And what a catharsis when that wall came down. Some of us remember that in the 89-90 when Germany was reunified, and it was just this release of all the tension and everything that was wrong over several generations with the Cold War to watch the wall come down. Finally, we have the gate. In John's Gospel, Jesus says, "I am the gate. Whoever enters by me will be saved and will come in and go out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I have come that they may have life and have it abundantly." One of my favorite passages in all the Bible. Jesus has come that we might experience the fullness of life. That's what the kingdom of God is about. The grace in the story, my friends, is the gate. Not the wall, not the disparity of rich and poor, and what we're supposed to do about it, not the judgment for the rich man's blindness. All those, of course, are in play, and they should open our eyes to what's going on in our world. But it is only in the gate, Jesus Christ, that we find hope in a world that is far from perfect. Note that the rich man asks for someone to rise from the dead to warn his family, prefiguring Jesus' resurrection at the end of the gospel narrative. He is denied this in that story, but we are not. It is precisely in the promise of Jesus' death and resurrection, the gospel, the good news, that the great chasm between heaven and earth is bridged, and between our own lives and the holy. That's our belief as Christians. That's the core of our faith. Now, at this point, you might be thinking, "That's great, Pastor Dan, but what do I do about the homeless person who's panhandling on the street when I walk by them? Or that person with the cardboard sign? Anything helps at the freeway exit. Or those people that ask for money and we're not so sure. Do I give them money or not?" I want to note that the church as a whole, and our congregation in particular, does a lot, both together, to help those in need. The church has always been in the interest of alleviating hunger and social needs and providing social services. And still, when we participate in that, and we're part of the church, of course, it's still hard to hear a text like this and not ask ourselves, what have I missed in my life? What have I failed to do, and will I be held accountable for it? And I remember Ralph Herman, an elderly gentleman in my first church. He was kind of had an Anglican background in the Church of England, and was kind of a Pentecostal type, real passionate on fire type. He liked to come to my office and just kind of shoot the breeze about anything. But he told me once, "Pastor Dan, I'm not really afraid of the sins of commission, those things that I've done that I wasn't supposed to do. Because I've already confessed them to God, and they've been forgiven. They're wiped clean for Jesus' sake. I'm scared to death," he said, "about the sins of omission, those things I was supposed to do and didn't." Though this text makes us a little uneasy, that's perhaps as it should be. Moreover, it's hard to know whether we're being taken advantage of or not. And after 17 years of ministry and hundreds of requests for money, I wish I had a simple answer to this, but I don't. When you choose to help someone in need, there is a kind of uncertainty you have to learn to live with. You may be taken advantage of in some way. In general, that's one of the reasons I don't give out cash, because I just cannot support physical substance addictions. I've seen too many times in my ministry and my personal life where that leads, and it's not pretty. And note that Lazarus in the text, he doesn't ask for money. He wants food. He needs sustenance. He needs help. But those are the kind of things I tend to give: is food, clothing, shelter, gasoline, things to help folks get by. I did have someone ask for money once, and I agreed to give him a tank of gas, and we went out to the parking lot, and he was driving a BMW, which was kind of awkward. The most important thing, however, whether you give money or not, is to have compassion for those in need, for those who are suffering. Whatever bad choices you think they may have had to get them into their situation, they are still fellow human beings, children of God, and precious in His sight. Compassion is precisely what the rich man's story did not have toward Lazarus, and that's what got him into trouble. Compassion as the core of human decency, really, as in our gospel story today, is also why I would say we need to reform our society to prioritize care of those most vulnerable and not just build walls and beef up our military indefinitely. Those are ironically signs of insecurity, that we feel we have to cling to something to keep us safe, and not a deep and abiding security in the only place we'll ever really be safe and secure, and that's in God and our relationship with the Creator. But when you see a fellow human being suffering and in need, see in their suffering your own suffering. Know that you have a common humanity with that person, that they are a sister or brother to you, and that they are loved by the same God. If you know these truths and cling to them, the Spirit will lead you and guide you as to what to do. Trust even more, however, in the gate, Jesus Christ, in whom and through whom God has had compassion